will be taking a look back at the top international stories of the past 7 days. Let me introduce you first to our panel. Anne Bagger-Mary is the senior editor of the International Herald Tribune. To my left, Stefan de Vries is the Paris correspondent for RTL4. Dave Clark is the deputy bureau chief for the news agency AFP. And Julia Grinstein is the editor-in-chief of the World Politics Review. And The World This Week is brought to you in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. All right, then let's get to our first subject. And after their 14th summit in under 2 years, EU leaders have come up with their third so-called comprehensive deal to end the Eurozone debt crisis. It includes a write-down on 50% of Greek debt following an agreement with the banks. It also boosts the Eurozone bailout fund to €1 trillion, although it's not yet clear where that money will come from, nor what exactly it will be used for. It also requires banks here in Europe to find €106 billion to shore up their balance sheets to prevent against any future losses on countries not paying their debts. Well, the much vaunted recapitalisation plan, that's what it's been called as well. All right, then let's start with you, Anne Bagger-Mary. The world was calling for a big bazooka, but did we end up with more of a pea shooter?
I think there were some very solid measures in the deal that was cobbled together, or hammered together, whatever metaphor you want to use, in Brussels. The bank recapitalization looks like it's pretty solid, although one question does remain. 2 days before the summit, the IIF, which represents the banks, was saying that $1 trillion just wasn't going to be enough. There was still going to be a risk of contagion. Now, all of a sudden, $1 trillion is plenty, and we're out of the woods. So you have to wonder which argument is correct. But anyway, the bank recapitalization is beginning to look a lot more solid. The EFSF, the bailout fund, as you rightly point out, we don't really know where that money is going to come from. It might even be just a promise of funds that might come in case they're needed. One hopes that they won't be. And then, of course, there's the haircut on the Greek debt, which is a big victory. It remains to be seen, though, whether it's enough of a write-down. I mean, the big problem with this entire crisis, at least the last 2-year phase of it, has been the sustainability of Greece. Can it pay off its debts? Is 50% down going to be enough to make the Greek economy sustainable and also solvent again? It's a big open question.
Oh, it sounds like a pretty good deal for Greece, doesn't it? Get half your debts just written off just like that?
Well, I think they were sort of on life support, and they needed something like this to keep going. So for someone who's in that kind of situation, the being on life support seems like a good deal. I think they'd probably prefer if they could repay their debts and if they didn't need the write-down. Just to follow up on what Anne said, the deal looks good, but it's not really a deal. It's more like a political wish list where they finally admitted what the objectives they need to reach are. And I think that might have some sort of reassuring impact essentially on the markets, but people are going to be waiting and watching to see how the details get filled in one by one, and there are a lot of questions that remain.
A lot of questions to be nailed down. But you were at the summit in Brussels, weren't you? And as I pointed out, this is the 14th such summit in under 2 years, and tempers are really wearing thin this time around, aren't they?
Yeah, it was really horrible actually to be there, because we already knew what was going to happen. There was a larger bailout, a larger EFSF, some write-off of the Greek debt, but nevertheless, it took them almost all night till 5 o'clock in the morning until they agreed upon something which is, in my opinion, completely incoherent, too little, too late, and completely useless. So I'm not very happy about the fact that I stole my sleep this week, and it will not help because it's the euro is not the problem. There's a whole different problem, and they're not able to address this problem. So it was completely useless.
Dave Clark, journalists clearly do not like this deal, but the markets did. They rallied on the back of this, didn't they, both today and yesterday? That's a good sign, no?
They got a bit of a rush in the morning after they were just on the joy of having a deal at all, but they've become a little bit more wobbly since. And I think another market we have to look at is the Italian bond market. And I think we're going to find that whatever happens to Greece, that people are going to keep a very, very close eye on European sovereign debt, and they're not going to want to see future write-downs, having lost 50% on Greek bonds. And I was discussing this with Judah before the show. We don't really know the details of the Greek write-down in the first place. If we're converting, say, $100 of Greek debt into $50, We don't know then whether this new debt, which the banks theoretically are going for voluntarily, we don't know how much interest is going to be paid on that. We don't know how long these new bonds are going to last. There's very little detail in this program. We're told it's 50% write down, but it'll probably end up being a lot less than that for Greece. They're going to have problems ongoing, and then the next we have to watch whether the Italians get caught up in this, and maybe the Spaniards, and their economies are much, much larger.
All right, well, while we're talking about Greece, let's have a quick listen to President Nicolas Sarkozy, who spoke following that deal last night. Here's what he had to say about Greece joining the Eurozone in the first place.
Let's tell it like it is. It was an error, because Greece entered on the basis of false figures, and it wasn't ready. Its economy wasn't ready to integrate the Eurozone. It was a decision taken in 2001, and for which we have borne the consequences in these last few months.
All right, there's Nicolas Sarkozy, perhaps not having caught up on his sleep yet, but he's saying what everyone's thinking, though, isn't he? Because Greece did join the Eurozone under false pretenses, if you look at the figures, no?
Yeah, he's getting on the bandwagon a little bit late. I mean, it is known that Greece lied to get in the euro, and it's been known for quite some time that it lied to get in the euro. It's interesting to see that he chose this moment to reveal and to be a plain talking man of the people kind of president of the republic. I mean, he's channeling Angela Merkel, who did look the banks in the eye in Brussels and said, look, you can either take a voluntary 50% now, or Greece will go under and you will lose all the money you've invested. And apparently, I wasn't there, but people who were there told me that she was cool, she was calm, she was collected, and Nicolas Sarkozy was very nervous when he said. So I think he's trying to make himself look like a tough, plain-spoken guy who saved the euro. I mean, this was very much a politically posturing statement that he made. Probably not the most collegial one that he might, not the most communautaire, as the French would say. But after all, that wasn't the point of the speech.
But France has a lot to lose here, doesn't it, Dave Clark? Because the AAA rating could be gone as a result of these huge debt obligations that France is taking on.
Well, yes, we don't yet know what the effect will be on France's own rating, and hence on Nicolas Sarkozy's poll ratings, which I'm sure are very prominent in his mind at the moment. He's got an election in 6.5 months' time, and the opinion polls suggest he's not going to win it. Next week, he is going to be grandstanding on the world stage yet again. He's got the G20 summit in Cannes, in which not only will he be back face-to-face with Angela Merkel and various of his European colleagues, but also with China, with the United States, and with a lot of people outside of Europe who've been very distressed by the way Europe has been handling this. There's a lot of Chinese money riding on this as well. And we're now going cap in hand to the Chinese. Effectively, they've created something called a Special Purpose Investment Vehicle, which has an acronym SPIV, which I'm not sure what an Anglophone would have chosen.
Vince Cable's
would have chosen SPIV as to impress people with our financial acumen. But we're going to take our SPIV to China and ask them to fill it up with money. And I imagine the Chinese are going to ask for concessions.
Right, and what are the Chinese going to want in return, do we think?
It's speculation, but I'd say they might want their economy declared a market economy. They might try to get a lifting of the EU arms embargo, which the EU apparently was pretty close in the past to lifting independently. So that might be thrown in as a sweetener. And I think also but more importantly, and this is where it could actually end up being a positive development, is that they're probably going to demand more openness for Chinese investment in Europe, as opposed to Chinese lending in Europe. And I think that's really where you could get to some of this, to addressing some of the structural problems, because Europe needs growth eventually to grow out of the debt. Otherwise, it's just going to be these kinds of summits every 3-4 months. And the Chinese do have cash to invest, but they've been blocked out by the fact that oftentimes national security issues get raised when Chinese companies buy sensitive companies or try to buy sensitive companies. But really, Europe needs investment. It doesn't have the cash to invest on its own. So that might be one area where the Chinese demand might actually end up being pretty complementary with what Europe needs.
Right, Judah's hit the nail on the head there, hasn't he? Because what we need is growth in Europe, and all we have is austerity. We're in this vicious cycle, aren't we? More austerity, less growth.
We're talking about the euro, but the euro is not the problem. The euro is very strong. It's a very reliable currency. But the problem is economical growth and also the political union and fiscal union and economical union. So what we need is very simple. It's a federation, but nobody dares to use this F word because the European citizens don't really like the idea of giving up their sovereignty. So as long as we're not able to address this problem, we will keep having these summits every 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. There will be another emergency summit within 2 weeks, and it will be probably cancelled, and then there will be another one a couple of days later. So we will continue on this road until we are really able to say, okay, we can't. This is not functioning anymore. We should find a different model. But I don't see any European leader being so. Have the courage to say so.
I've seen the federalism word brought up a lot more now.
Yeah, that's true.
Than, for instance, a year ago.
Yeah.
Than even in July.
Well, I mean, the thing is that we talk about the Greek debt crisis and the European debt crisis, but that's really shorthand for a few different crises.
Yeah.
And one of them is a political crisis in terms of solidarity in Europe. About a year and a half ago, it wasn't very clear whether Germany politically wanted to bail out Greece or saw the interest in doing so. There's also an institutional crisis in the sense that the euro is a common currency. It's a common monetary union, but there's not fiscal governance on a federal level whereby all the various different economies can be harmonized and fine-tuned in terms of what they need in terms of monetary policy, fiscal policy, things like that. As these crisis summits become more frequent, the bar has been it's been moved down the road further and further towards federalism. People are talking about it. Yeah. They've used a lot of duct tape and a lot of hodgepodge of different measures. What they have now is essentially a really badly inefficient version of an institutionalized federalism.
I'm not sure how much further down the road
harmonized.
we've got towards federalism. I think we've shown up all the failings of the current system or lack of system. If that then leads to people pushing for greater federalism, then so be it. But we've also seen national parliaments, the British Parliament effectively repudiated the government's policy, relied on the opposition to get for the coalition to face down a motion. And in Germany, the Bundestag insisted on voting before Merkel could even go to Brussels and discuss.
There are vetoes. I mean, there are national vetoes, but I think that also even 2 years ago, the idea that the European Commission would have a right to look at national budgets.
Well, that's what they've agreed to do, isn't it?
Now
They're going to strengthen that surveillance, but we know that the Stability Fund has been ignored by pretty much everyone for years. So is that really the way forward to have more surveillance? And what will they do if the rules are breached?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I tend to agree that there has been a lot more progress made toward even accepting the idea and talking about federal structures for Europe beyond the currency union. Interestingly, though, the countries that are talking about it the most and in the most clear terms are the ones that figured that in the end they're going to be running it, and that's France and Germany. If you look at the reactions in Italy and Greece to the deal and to what it means for those economies, you've got even people who support the deal in Greece saying we have to do it ourselves. This can't mean any loss of sovereignty, even though the country is basically owned by others. In Italy, the reaction was even more virulent. You can't possibly mean that our prime minister had to submit a letter of intentions to a bunch of strangers to tell us how to govern our country. It's admitting that we can't do it ourselves. It's a loss of sovereignty. That word keeps coming up over and over again, but it comes up among the countries who are most likely to lose sovereignty because they have mismanaged their economies and need to submit themselves, in many people's view, to a federal system.
And this is the key problem with Europe where it is at the moment, isn't it? And when the Euro project was introduced 10 or so years ago, this wasn't really thought about so much. And now it's becoming a real pressing issue, isn't it?
Yeah, well, when the euro was designed in 1992 in Maastricht, there were already a lot of advisors and very influential people, amongst them Jacques Attali, for instance, who said at that very moment when they were negotiating that this will not work without a political union. And the leaders at that time, which were Mitterrand and Kohl, if I'm not wrong, they said, well, it's great that we already have this currency. That's already big progress. I think we think political union is too far. So they knew about the possible problem, but they didn't have the courage to say, okay, let's do a political union as well. They were already very happy with this currency. And so everybody knew that there was a time bomb actually ticking, and now it has exploded, and we don't really have the responses to what to do. And what I think is very interesting is that actually the financial markets are forcing us to become a federation, and that the leaders don't have any other option, and everything they try to avoid, they're forced to do. So and that's the problem. If you don't have any vision, then you're basically very passive, and that's what's happening right there. Yeah. If you see these guys talking, they don't really know what they're talking about, because seriously, because I spoke to many of them, of the leaders who were there at the reunion on Wednesday night.
They didn't want to be there, did they?
Sorry?
You could tell that most of them didn't really want to be there.
They are not able to explain what they really decided upon. And they are really together, well, with the 17 Euro leaders. They're on their own. There are no advisors. They can't leave the room to ask any advice. So they are deciding something which is really extremely complicated. But, they really don't know what they're doing.
With no guidance and no precedent.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up 1992, because if you want to look at why this is failing and why there's so little desire on the part of many leaders to talk about political union, you go back to the origins of the EU, and you look at what the predominant idea was, which was to interlock the economies of Europe so that there would be no more war.
Principally France and Germany.
Principally France and Germany. There's a great deal of tension still about the idea. In Europe, there's a great deal of tension about the idea of letting Germany run things. And you saw that last night in Sarkozy's speech. He took quite a bit of time to talk about how aligning the French economy with Germany's, marching arm in arm with Mrs. Merkel, was not somehow a betrayal of all the history. I mean, he talked about it. We have a very painful history with Germany, but people of vision and peace have been able to build bridges. And he put himself in the direct line of Mitterrand and Kohl and de Gaulle and Adenauer. I mean, it was very consciously trying to assuage the fear that closer ties with Germany were somehow going to undermine the key idea behind the founding of the Union.
But the generation of Kohl and Mitterrand could remember the war, and the electorates that Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel have to deal with, it's almost unimaginable.
It's true.
Right.
It's
Right.
true. And they talk to young people, and they say, I've never known a time when France and Germany were friendly.
That's what was really striking about the days leading up to the summit, because both Sarkozy and Merkel, in speeches, explicitly raised the possibility of war on the European continent if the Union isn't saved. One thing I just wanted to add to what Stefan brought up is that really, when you look at this crisis, if you say it starts with the Greek debt crisis, it starts because what Sarkozy said in his speech comes out to light. There's an election in Greece. The new government comes clean and says the books have been cooked, and progressively over each successive summit, there's been a sense of saying we've done what it takes. It hasn't been done. You have the bank stress tests in Europe. Everything's fine. Dexia goes under, a month later? Yeah. One thing after another, what it comes down to is that it's not, at this point, it's not just a financial crisis. It's a crisis of legitimacy and credibility.
Okay, sadly, we're going to have to leave the Eurozone there for the time being. I know there's a lot more to say about it, but we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have the headlines for you and the second part of tonight's debate.